Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, should you choose to accept it, we are ranking the Mission Impossible movies. Based on Bruce Geller's 1966 television series, Mission Impossible was first brought to the silver screen in 1996 by legendary director Brian De Palma and producer Tom Cruise. Cruise produced and played the lead, Ethan Hunt, in all 8 films. The franchise has a very wide rotating cast of characters around Cruise, but Ving Rhames as Luther Stickle appears in all 8 films, and Simon Pegg's Benji Dunn appears in the final 6 films. The franchise is widely known for its non-stop action and elaborate set pieces that often center around Tom Cruise doing his own death-defying stunts. Despite critical praise and high audience scores, the franchise didn't earn its first Oscar nominations until the then titled Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 was released in 2023. The film was nominated for Best Sound and Best Visual Effects. In May of 2025, Ethan, Luther, and Benji will live and die in the shadows for those that they hold close and for those they never meet, and ask us to trust them one last time in Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. Now, before we get into the rankings, I think it's important to talk about my history with the franchise, which really isn't a whole ton. I actually hadn't seen any Mission Impossible film until before Dead Reckoning came out, so that was 2 years ago. It was like 2019 was kind of the first year that I was like really getting into going to the movies, and so Fallout was number 6, right? I believe, and so that just kind of came out right before I really got into going to the cinema and going and watching movies at the theater. So I just kind of had just skipped the entire Mission Impossible franchise. And I also think it's important to note too that, again, I think I've talked about this a couple times on the channel, that for me, early in my life, I wasn't the biggest action movie fan, which maybe seems weird, but I just didn't love movies where the story or the plot just stops for extended periods of time for action set pieces. And obviously now the older I'm getting, the more I'm realizing that good action films can still have the plot and the narrative running through these amazing action set pieces. It's not always, sometimes there are, bad action movies where it really is just we stop and now we're just blowing things up for 30 straight minutes and nothing's really happening and there's no real point or plot, and those are kind of like the dumb action movies. But so I think I maybe was kind of just prejudging Mission Impossible a little bit, not giving it its credit for not being a dumb action franchise, which it absolutely isn't. And so I had a lot of fun in 2023 when I watched all of the films right up into Dead Reckoning. And then I did the same thing again this year. I was just, it was Memorial Day weekend, had a long 3-day weekend, was just itching to, I was excited to go see the new film Final Reckoning in theaters, but I was like, it's been a couple years since I've seen the franchise, and so I had the thought of, let's binge it all this weekend, let's go see Final Reckoning, and then let's put about a ranking, a video up on YouTube. So again, super excited for this ranking, but again, I'm not also like the longest tenured fan in the franchise, right? Like, there's people that have grown up on these movies and love these movies a whole lot more, so definitely take their rankings a little bit more seriously than mine. But now that I've seen every film twice, except Final Reckoning just the one time, I think I have a pretty good idea of where these films all rank in my mind. Coming in at number 8, Mission Impossible 2. With computer genius Luther Stickle at his side and a beautiful thief on his mind, Agent Ethan Hunt races across Australia and Spain to stop a former IMF agent from unleashing a genetically engineered biological weapon called Chimera. This mission, should Hunt choose to accept it, plunges him into the center of an international crisis of terrifying magnitude. The film stars Tom Cruise, Dougray Scott, Thandie Newton, Ving Rhames, and Brendan Gleeson. Mission Impossible 2 was directed by John Woo and was released in 2000. Now, there's a lot of franchises where I think there is kind of maybe a consensus ranking. What I've seen, I haven't looked at a whole ton of people's, but a lot of people are just posting their Mission Impossible rankings, like on Twitter, which was kind of what inspired me to make the video. But in some of those videos, I would see there isn't really a great consensus in terms of like, 1 through 5 and 1 through 6 and sometimes 1 through 7, but there is a little bit of a consensus that I do see a lot of people that put Mission Impossible 2 as the worst of the franchise. And this is one of those where I think the easiest way for me to explain, that why this is my least favorite of the franchise, which it's still a fine film. It's not, I probably don't love it as much as like some people still do, but it's still, it's just nowhere near the rest of the list for me. And that, I think it really kind of comes down to the idea of, like I just said, I wasn't the biggest like action movie fan, and so when I was watching this the first time, I watched the first Mission Impossible, and there's a lot, obviously it's an action film, but there was so much kind of going into it with the plot and kind of the mystery and kind of the deception, and there's the plot I think was a lot better in the first one for me, where I was way more invested. And obviously Brian De Palma is the director of the first one. There was a lot more that I was kind of like, oh, the first Mission Impossible kind of caught me off guard, caught me by surprise a little bit. And then I saw Mission Impossible 2, and I kind of immediately fell back to, oh, okay, this is kind of what I thought the Mission Impossible franchise was maybe just these action movies that weren't going to connect with me, these set pieces, or these some of the characters in the development, where I'm like, okay, we're kind of just ignoring some of the things that I think kind of worked well in the first one. And it felt like it was one of those things where you had a hit, you had the first movie that was really great, and then you're like, okay, we got to do a sequel, we got to bring it back, we got to keep the franchise going. But you really, I mean, you didn't bring the director back, you still had Tom Cruise obviously, but it feels like I didn't look too closely into this besides Tom Cruise, like how many of the writers came back, how many, the cinematographer, things like that, the people behind the camera that make the film work. Did they retain anyone there? What was kind of the idea? Again, I'm not familiar at all with the television series, so I don't know if, obviously I don't think it's Ethan Hunt, I don't think is the character in the television series, but are these general stories that these IMF agents are going through, is this kind of the same thing that's happening? Like, is this what Mission Impossible 2 is based off of, something from the television show, or was it their own idea that they came up with? There's so many things in my head that I'm just like, it didn't click as much as the first one did for me. And so watching it the first time, I really did not like Mission Impossible 2 the first time. Now watching it the second time, it's still not my, obviously, a favorite film of mine. I'm not super high on it, but it was better. And that is one thing that I also noticed with this on second watches. Literally, I think every single film improved. Like, I liked it more on a second watch. The more time you spend with these characters, the more you watch this franchise, the more you're like hooked onto each story and each film along the way. So that is something that obviously give this franchise its flowers for it being a film series that you want to watch every film, and you want to watch them multiple times, because the more and more you watch it, like, the more fun you have with the franchise. And so I will say that for Mission Impossible 2, it was better on a rewatch, as well as everything else on this list. Coming in at number 7, Mission Impossible 3. Retired from active duty and training recruits for the Impossible Mission Force, Agent Ethan Hunt faces the toughest foe of his career, Owen Davian, an international broker of arms and information, who's as cunning as he is ruthless. Davian emerges to threaten Hunt and all that he holds dear, including the woman Hunt loves. The film stars Tom Cruise, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Ving Rhames, Billy Crudup, and Michelle Monaghan. Mission Impossible 3 was directed by J.J. Abrams and was released in 2006. Now, I should say, or should point out, that on my Letterboxd, which there's a link to my Letterboxd in the description of this video if you want to go follow me over there, but on Letterboxd, anytime I watch, like, especially if I'm watching them all for the first time, I love making lists and making, like, a ranked, a list of just, ranking the franchise. And so I did this back in 2023 before Dead Reckoning. I ranked the whole franchise, and then usually what I do on Letterboxd is, after maybe like a year or so after the newest film's release, I guess it depends on the franchise. If it's one that I think there's more films that are coming, I'll just like private or like hide the list, so it wasn't still public. But I knew that I had my Mission Impossible ranking still on Letterboxd. I knew I still had it. And so I went back in and I looked at it. I was surprised that on first watch, I actually had 2 over 3. And looking back at it now on this rewatch, I don't know how that's possible. Like, I don't know why I did that, because I remember not really liking 2. I must have just really not liked 3 at the time. I do remember the first time not really caring for, because this is another benefit of rewatches. So I guess this is maybe a little bit of a spoiler for, again, a franchise, and for the early installments of the franchise that are decades old at this point. But I didn't love the whole romance and wife, getting engaged, that whole storyline. I think I found it not I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I just wasn't the biggest fan of the kind of the plot being like, oh, we've kidnapped your wife, or oh, we have your wife, and now you have to track down, your loved one. Like, when I think Mission Impossible, I think not that your wife or your loved one isn't like big scale. Obviously to you it is, but like, I'm used to the Ethan Hunt adventures where the entire world is at stake, and he's making these tough choices and refusing to sacrifice his friends, when it's like this big global scale thing that like is the issue. And then in this one, at least on the first watch, I remember not really caring, because I was like, I'm just not buying into like him being married. And I also, again, watching him for the first time, I kind of knew that he wasn't married in later. I guess that there's kind of your spoiler. I knew he wasn't really married in any of the later ones, and so I was like, the entire time I just wasn't really connected. Now, obviously, as the franchise has gone on, and after the first watch, once I watched mainly four, but four on, I guess 4 and 6 are the two that Michelle Monaghan is in. But seeing those, I then all of a sudden had so much more of an appreciation for 3 and for her character in Mission Impossible 3. And then it's the same thing on this rewatch, now watching 3 with that information in my head of like knowing really what's happening here in this film, but what it means for the future, like what it means for Ghost Protocol and Fallout, her involvement in those films. It made me just appreciate not just her character, but just the whole story a little bit more. And what I do have to say is, I'm an idiot for, in 2023, putting this in last, because even then I remembered how great Philip Seymour Hoffman was. Like, I'm a damn idiot. Like, why? How did I not, like, how did I put the film that has this Philip Seymour Hoffman performance in last place on my rankings back then? Because he alone brings this film up. Like, he alone is, obviously there's other things that are great and good going on in the film, but he elevates this film, like, to a point that's like, from potentially being like a mindless action film to being something really captivating and giving not the most like in-depth villain. Like, you talk about great movie villains and you'll talk about like I've drawn a blank on his name, Anton Chigurh, like and I mean, like the Joker, those are kind of the most common that I think come up a lot in like great villains in cinema history. And they have these things where they're kind of either mysterious, or they have, if you're gonna say like Thanos, you have like someone that comes in and they have such a strong character backstory. Michael B. Jordan's character in Black Panther, like they either have a great backstory, or they even have like a compelling narrative to the point that you're like, I kind of agree with you, or like you may be even in the right here in these situations. And I think that, Philip Seymour Hoffman's villain in this, he kind of falls a little bit more into kind of just the mysterious. You don't know a whole ton about him, but every second he's on screen, he is captivating. And for a franchise that has, I mean, you can't really say like ups and downs, because it's a lot of ups. Like, everything about this franchise, especially kind of like from this point on my list, is like, it's all great. It's one of those things that the villains, even though the franchise is great, the villains aren't always the best. And it really comes down to, I think it's Philip Seymour Hoffman and then another villain that we'll talk about at the top of this list, or at the end of this video. Essentially, those are kind of like the two villains that like really stand out. Like, Philip Seymour Hoffman, again, he solely brings this film up to another level for me, which, like I mentioned, every single one of these films got better on this rewatch now 2 years later after I saw them for the first time. Everything either got bumped up maybe like a half star, or maybe it stayed the same star ranking. But this is one where I think I gave Mission Impossible 3 like an entire star, maybe even a star and a half bump on my rankings. Like, I really thoroughly enjoyed this a whole lot more than I remember I did back in 2023. Coming in at number 6, Mission Impossible. When Ethan Hunt, the leader of a crack espionage team whose perilous operation has gone awry with no explanation, discovers that a mole has penetrated the CIA, he's surprised to learn that he's the prime suspect. To clear his name, Hunt now must ferret out the real double agent, and, in the process, even the score. The film stars Tom Cruise, Jon Voight, Henry Czerny, Emmanuel Béart, and Jean Reno. Mission Impossible was directed by Brian De Palma and was released in 1996. Now, the one thing that is really interesting to me about ranking this franchise is, again, I noticed that there isn't like a great consensus. There is kind of a good, like, little bit of almost a random nature to it, because it's just kind of personal preferences. So many of these films are so good that it really is just personal preferences that kind of come out in the end. I noticed that even so, there are films still kind of stay in the same range. If you see a film at the number 1 spot on someone's list, it's probably at least top 3 on almost everyone else's list. And for the most part, every film is kind of just in the same little area. The original Mission Impossible is the one that I think has the widest range. I've noticed this on people's lists. Some people have it at their number 1. I don't think anyone really has it as their number 8, but maybe it's number 7 for some people, if people really love Philip Seymour Hoffman that much that, it elevates 3 above the original. I don't think it does, but it's one of those that, like, this is all over for a lot of people. And for me, again, this is one that I think this is also one of those films that if I had seen this when I was young, if I was a fan since I was a kid, or just again when I was a little bit younger, I do think the nostalgia for this film would play a huge part in loving it a whole lot more than I do. But as it stands, it is still, again, way better than I thought, and it was one of those films that, again, I was kind of just nervous about this whole franchise back in 2023. Didn't know if I was going to really be a big fan. Once I watched this first Mission Impossible, I came to the realization, I was like, yeah, there's stuff here. Like, this isn't just, like I was saying, mindless, dumb action. The action in here is either well shot, or it's intense, or again, it is the plot. It's not like we're just, again, stopping and blowing up a city and then moving on, and there's not like there's not consequences to the actions. Like, there are consequences to everything that they do in this franchise, and it really kind of starts here. This was the first film where you get that. And this is also one of those films that, again, the first time seeing this in 2023, I was, I guess, what's the quick math on that? I was 27 years too late, really, I guess, later in seeing this. But it's still one of those that, as I was watching it, it's so easy to see this the first time you watch this, to be like, yeah, I get why this is a classic. I get why so many people love this. There's so many iconic moments, iconic lines, things like the self-destruct in 5 seconds, like the tape, or your mission should you choose to accept it, like these iconic lines that I'm sure I had seen in I I just thought of, like, Inspector Gadget. I it's been 2 decades since I've seen that, but I feel like they kind of do some of those, like, self-destructing messages and things like that. But it's just like one of those that, there's so many iconic moments and lines that have just become like staples in cinema and in Hollywood, in the medium of just entertainment. Again, The Simpsons is always like the easiest one to just say, like, The Simpsons have probably parodied it because they've parodied everything, but I feel like they've kind of had some references to it, and just in pop culture, there's probably so many tie-ins and references to this franchise because it's such an iconic film, from the 90s. It's has this lasting impact, and I could easily tell why. On first watch in 2023, you can see this is a film, and again, in a franchise that I'm like, just on first watch, I was like, I totally get it. I get why everyone loves this. It is still, I'm going to put it here at 6, though. Again, this feels weird, but I will say probably 6 on up, especially this little range here, 6 through 3 maybe, is like, you could just shuffle them around. Like, they're all almost interchangeable. It maybe just depends on the day. But for now, I'm going to put it a little bit lower, because there really is something about the newer films that really kind of worked for me a little bit more. Coming in at number 5, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Ethan Hunt and the IMF team continue their search for the terrifying AI known as the Entity, which has infiltrated intelligence networks all over the globe. With the world's governments and a mysterious ghost from Ethan's past on their trail, joined by new allies and armed with the means to shut down the Entity for good, Hunt is in a race against time to prevent the world as we know it from changing forever. The film stars Tom Cruise, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, Haley Atwell, and Pom Klementieff. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning was directed by Christopher McQuarrie and was released in 2025. And here's where we have the newest entry in the franchise. Because this movie is still so new, it's only been in theaters a week, from when I'm recording this. And maybe you haven't had the chance to see it. I'm not going to really talk too much. I'm not going to give too much of a review here, at least anything that could be spoilers. The couple things I will say about this is, I do like the idea that what this film did of becoming kind of a bigger, essentially kind of being the final film in a franchise where it's trying to tie all these things together. There were elements in some parts of that I liked. There were some parts of when they were doing that didn't work really well for me, and there's some of it that's a little bit sloppy, and a lot of flashbacks early on in the film. So there's a couple things here and there when I was like, it's not quite working for me. But what I will say, what did work for me is there's a couple really, but there's two big kind of set pieces that I can think of, like the big action set pieces or the big moments of the film. One in particular that was like some of the best, like, I don't want to spoil it, but it's maybe around like 2/3 of the way through the movie. If you've seen it, you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's, Tom Cruise is kind of by himself doing something. And that whole set piece, that whole thing, it lasts for, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes of just this set piece. And it was so breathtaking. I was nervous. I was anxious. It was a lot of fun. and then it kind of ended a little choppy. It wasn't the best ending to that set piece. And then there's another set piece later on in the film. Same thing. Amazing action, amazing the way it's shot. I can't wait to see the behind the scenes stuff on how they pulled it off. There's Tom Cruise himself is posting some pictures and stuff on Twitter where it's like people are looking at it and they're like, how did you pull this off? Like you can tell he's not wearing like anything like for safety, and it's like you're looking at it and be like, how did you do this? But in the movie it works really well, and then it does the same thing where it kind of ended a little choppy and kind of ended a little weird for me. So that was the thing I think for The Final Reckoning. That's kind of my quick little review of the film. Is there were some things that worked really well for me, and then it just didn't feel like it ever quite nailed like the landing. It felt like it was really good, and then it kind of just sputtered out at the end. And so that was kind of my quick little review of The Final Reckoning. There's just too many moments like that for it to really work for me. If you're curious, I like rated it 3.5 on Letterboxd. It's close to like a 4, but it's one of those films that I think, as more time goes on, maybe in a couple years, or I guess in a couple months, maybe I'll revisit this and maybe I'll have a little bit more of appreciation for. But right now, it's on one watch. I have a hard time putting it above anything else that's coming on this list, because it just didn't. Again, some of the moments, some highlights where it reached the same heights as some of these other films, but every time it just didn't quite feel like it didn't stick the landing, which is something that the rest of the films on this list, they didn't have any issues doing. It was sticking the landing during their real exciting and climactic moments. Coming in at number 4, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Ethan Hunt and his team are racing against time to track down a dangerous terrorist named Hendrix, who has gained access to Russia's nuclear launch codes and is planning a strike on the United States. An attempt to stop him ends in an explosion causing severe destruction to the Kremlin and the IMF to be implicated in the bombing, forcing the president to disavow them. No longer being aided by the government, Ethan and his team chase Hendrix around the globe, although they might still be too late to stop a disaster. The film stars Tom Cruise, Paula Patton, Simon Pegg, Jeremy Renner, and Michael Nyqvist. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol was directed by Brad Bird and was released in 2011. And here's another one where I noticed that I'm maybe a little bit higher on Ghost Protocol than I've seen some people. Ghost Protocol, I feel like, tends to be a little bit lower, I think, on some people's on rankings. But for me, this is going to be a weird comparison. If you I guess if you get why I'm making the comparison, you'll get it. If you don't, allow me to explain the comparison. This feels like the Fast Five of the Mission Impossible franchise. And what that is it's, again, for the first 3 films of this franchise, I was like, okay, this franchise is what it is. And then Ghost Protocol comes in and is like, oh, we've just taken a step up. We've elevated this franchise. And it's kind of the same. That's what Fast and Furious is. The first 4 are kind of like, whatever, it's this dumb. Again, that's, a dumb action franchise. And then Fast 5 comes in and you think, whoa, like, this has changed the direction of, like, this saved this franchise. It made it kind of go in a different direction. Now, the difference between those is the Fast and Furious franchise, didn't really nail the last couple films. Like, at number 5, it's like, oh, this is the new direction we're going, and then it kind of went right back into kind of the slop and like mindless dumb action, that it was kind of a victim of, and in a couple of the movies, really, really dumb action. Mission Impossible doesn't have that problem at all, where you get to this movie and it's like, oh, hey, here's kind of where we're going, here's the new direction, here's Benji's a main character now, here's like all this that's going on here, and all of a sudden it's like, now we have this new direction of where this franchise is going, and it's riveting, and it's every film is just, it continues in that same path, that same pattern. So I think that's kind of what makes Mission Impossible work all the way through. But again, for me, it was Ghost Protocol. The first time I watched this franchise, that was the film where it really stood out to me of like, oh, we've taken a step up, we've kind of elevated this franchise, and I'm all the way bought in now, and I'm ready to go. This is an amazing franchise. And Ghost Protocol, it is one of those that it still is, again, it's kind of the first of this new wave where you have Paula Patton, who's in this film and then never referenced, never mentioned again, at least as far as I remember, maybe like a passing line, they maybe mention her or something. And then you get Jeremy Renner, who is here in one film and the next, and then he kind of disappears and you just don't really talk about him anymore. So this franchise does still have a little bit of those elements, but this is kind of the beginning, again, like I said, of both like Benji and Luther kind of becoming main characters and mainstays that kind of help stable this franchise around Ethan Hunt and kind of carry it into this new direction. So I just have a lot of fun with Ghost Protocol. The opening scene is, again, and really that that it really was the opening scene of like, that was kind of where my mind was kind of blown a little bit, where I was just like, this is so much more fun than what we've been seeing the first couple of films in this franchise. And again, this is one of those that when you get to the end, there is a little bit more, you should say a little bit more kind of heart. That again, like I mentioned, Ghost Protocol is one of the two other films with Ethan Hunt's wife. You see the role that she plays, what's kind of happening with that relationship, and again, after even seeing this the first time, it immediately made me kind of rethink 3 and be like, okay, maybe I should have appreciated it a little bit more, because this is an important storyline, and you see why it's important here in Ghost Protocol, and then you'll see again why in a couple other films. And again, it's just one of those. This is also probably the first film in the franchise that has the tower sequence. I can't think of what the name of the tower is that he's climbing, but it's like it's the first one where maybe I guess he's climbing like the cliffs in 2, but I feel like this is the first one where it's like it gives you like a set piece that Tom's doing his own stunts, and it's like insane as you're watching it, where you're like, what is happening? Like, how is he doing this? Like, how is this a concept? Like, even if you're thinking in the world of the characters, you're thinking like, how is an agent, again with those gloves, the sticky gloves, like how would you even be comfortable doing this? Like, everything about those moments are just kind of like what makes a great action movie. You're so bought in, you're so like nervous. And this is one of those, like, if that film was just on in the background and I'm just on my phone not really paying attention to the movie, that scene turns on, I'm putting my phone down and I'm locked in for the duration of like that scene. Those are these breathtaking stunts that Tom Cruise pulls off in this franchise. That's kind of the first one for me. I remember watching it, back then. That was the first time where I had that moment of like, whoa, like this is insane. So I have great memories of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Some of the characters, some of the like the small, some of them are smaller, but some of this kind of the side characters are really captivating. And again, it just makes for me, again, because you also have is this the first film with Alec Baldwin? I think like he's a great kind of side character. You get like Lea Seydoux, who really doesn't have a whole ton to do or a whole lot to say, doesn't have a lot of lines, but she's part of a great kind of action sequence. Like, this is when there's so much about like the main characters, they all work together, the side characters are all working really well together. So this was just the first time seeing this, and even now, there's something about once we hit Ghost Protocol for me that the franchise just takes a step up, and so I love Ghost Protocol. Coming in at number 3, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Ethan and team take on their most impossible mission yet, eradicating the Syndicate, an international and highly skilled rogue organization committed to destroying the IMF. The film stars Tom Cruise, Rebecca Ferguson, Jeremy Renner, Simon Pegg, and Sean Harris. Mission Impossible Rogue Nation was directed by Christopher McQuarrie and was released in 2015. And I think maybe Rogue Nation is a little bit surprising being here at 3, because I noticed a lot of people have Rogue Nation is 1 or 2 on like a lot of people's lists. And it's a pretty clear and obvious reason why. This is Rebecca Ferguson time. This is when we get to Rebecca Ferguson. I noticed that's a thing a lot of people talk about, is once Rebecca Ferguson is introduced to the franchise, that's when, like, I guess I do the same thing. It's the 3 Rebecca Ferguson films are my top 3. But it just, like, the films, again, just take another step. You got to Ghost Protocol, now you come to Rogue Nation, and it's like we're taking another step. We're elevating this another level. And that's really like Rogue Nation. It's just, again, Rebecca Ferguson's character is one of the first where you get this kind of this thing where you get, the first couple movies, especially, I mean, I guess you had like Thandie Newton's character in 2 is I guess she was also just a thief, right? She's not like a spy, but she kind of has some action stuff, but then she kind of just gets sidelined a little bit and is maybe just kind of the love interest. Not like she's a big love interest, but a little. I guess you can say she's a love interest in 2, and then you get to 3 where he's got his wife, and who really is just kind of the love interest. And then this is when you get to Ghost Protocol. Obviously, it starts with Paula Patton, who is like an agent, and there isn't really that there, and it's just like she's there, but she is just a badass, and she is part of the team, and she's doing all the stunts, and she's working with the team. And then it's the same thing here. Obviously, in this first one, Rebecca Ferguson isn't quite all the way on the team, because that's a thing that happens all the time in the Mission Impossible films. It's something Ethan Hunt does, where he takes the people who aren't necessarily on the team at the beginning, but because he has that kind of that love for his friends and for the team and for those that are around him, that he kind of like open arms kind of welcomes people in. And so that's kind of what happens here with Rebecca Ferguson. But she is so captivating at the beginning of the film, is kind of this, you don't, she's kind of a mysterious character. You don't know exactly where she is. You don't know what her motivations are. And as the film's going on, you're realizing she is a pretty kind of complex character. And I love that she's allowed to kind of just be this complex character that isn't just, because I mean, she really isn't kind of like a love interest at all, but she is just kind of there and is just gets to be the mysterious character at times, but then really is just kind of a badass. The whole opera scene, she's, phenomenal in that. She's really captivating in the very beginning scene, kind of the, I don't know what you want to call it. I mean, the scene with the bone doctor, the capture scene where, I mean, it's one of the iconic moments in the franchise too, where Ethan Hunt's Tom Cruise is handcuffed to like that pole and is able to kind of like hop his way up the pole and then kind of fight while still being stuck in the handcuffs and having to get those off. Like, there's so many things that, again, so much of this film that works really well, but it's enhanced by Rebecca Ferguson and by her presence. And then I think, is it, yeah, so I feel like I'm kind of drawing a blank, or I'm getting like the timelines mixed up on these, because again, I watched them all so fast, they do kind of like run together a little bit. This is, Alec Baldwin's definitely in this. Is this, because I think it's him and yeah, I think this is the one, right, with him and Jeremy Renner. Oh no, this is, because this is the second film, so this is when Alec Baldwin's kind of more on the team, or a part of the IMF. So his presence is great here. And I should also mention, because I talked about there's two kind of iconic villains of this franchise. I wasn't counting Sean Harris here. I wasn't giving him credit. He's kind of, I guess, maybe the third villain, but he is really good in this film. Like, he is very captivating. Just classic, just a great voice, and so it's like, whenever he's talking, you just get the feeling of like, oh yeah, this is a bad guy, like this syndicate, this organization, like this is a bad organization. And you are really kind of just like on edge whenever he's, whether it's monologuing or just kind of talking or whatever. He brings a whole lot to the film as well, so I do need to give him flowers. He's probably, yeah, the third best villain in the franchise, but he's a lot of fun. Everything about Rogue Nation really works. And again, we're doing this thing now where we've reached the point where every film feels like it's elevating on top of the previous film. So it's kind of the real kind of exciting era. You may notice that, I guess, other than Final Reckoning, the three films I have last year are, I guess it would be 5, 6, and 7 are like the films. And so again, we've reached this is the sweet spot for the Mission Impossible franchise for me. I just love these films a whole lot, starting with Rogue Nation. Coming in at number 2, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. Ethan Hunt and his IMF team embark on their most dangerous mission yet, to track down a terrifying new weapon that threatens all of humanity before it falls into the wrong hands. With control of the future and the world's fate at stake, and dark forces from Ethan's past closing in, a deadly race around the globe begins. Confronted by a mysterious, all-powerful enemy, Ethan must consider that nothing can matter more than his mission, not even the lives of those he cares about the most. The film stars Tom Cruise, Hayley Atwell, Rebecca Ferguson, Vanessa Kirby, and Esai Morales. Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning was directed by Christopher McQuarrie and was released in 2023. Now, I will say that there is maybe a little bit of a bias here, or kind of an unfair advantage that this film has, that every entry before this, besides, I guess, The Final Reckoning, didn't have, and that this is the first Mission Impossible film that I saw in theaters. And I remember going and seeing this in a sold-out IMAX showing, and just being blown away. And again, at this point, I had seen all of the Mission Impossible films. I just rewatched them all prior to this, and so I was aware of the franchise, and I was kind of becoming a fan. But then this film came out, and seeing this in theaters made me just fall in love with the franchise even more. I was so bought in and just having the time of my life seeing this in the theaters. And the thing I will say about Dead Reckoning, what is really the most impressive for me, is that this is like, out of all the films in the Mission Impossible franchise that have kind of the crazy stunts and have the jaw-dropping moments, this film has like 7 of them. This film is like the set piece of the movie, where it's like we're bouncing around from, you get the airport scene, you get the car chase scene, you get I guess you kind of, not like a lull or anything, but you kind of just have between those at kind of the beginning, and then once you get towards the end of the film is when you get the The long extended motorcycle scene of Tom Cruise trying to get on the train, and then you have the train sequence, which is like, the final, I guess, I don't know what it is, 20 minutes or so of the movie, that is just incredible. Every moment of this film was just, and again, also seeing it, that's why I say it's an unfair advantage, but seeing this on the big screen, just, I was so in love with this film. Absolutely, just everything worked. One thing I don't think I've been giving enough credit to, or haven't been really kind of talking about enough in all of these, talking about these films, is I'm not giving enough credit to the acting, because again, the acting is great in all of these, but Haley Atwell is such an amazing, and it's one of those that when you see this and when you see Final Reckoning, you watch it and you think, like, we should have got Haley Atwell in these sooner. Like, we should have, like, just magically, or not magically, obviously she's around, she's been acting for a while. Like, she's not like some brand new up and comer, but she's so amazing in these movies. Like, I just absolutely love Haley Atwell in these. Same with obviously Rebecca Ferguson. We've talked about these kind of being the films, the Rebecca Ferguson era, but then you also are bringing in Vanessa Kirby, who is just excellent in in her kind of slightly villainous role. Like, she's not really a villain, but she's just kind of a third party that's, does, maybe is the way you kind of are interpreting it, maybe she's someone that could be doing some good things, but at least from what we're seeing in the couple films that we see her in, she's, at least in this one especially, what she's doing at this point, again, it's kind of out of greed and for her own personal gain, but it's really, we understand the significance of what she's doing and how it's the negative, like, impact that's coming. But again, this is also, I can think, maybe the film where it's just, this is the one really where just the women in the Mission Impossible franchise really got the biggest opportunity to just kind of shine. Like, again, all three of them, Haley Atwell, Rebecca Ferguson, Vanessa Kirby, they are all phenomenal, and they all bring such unique and enticing and just, like, interesting characteristics and quirks and things to their performances that, again, it's just, this is maybe out of all of the films, this is the one that I love the most from just the character perspective, from the performance based, just seeing how these characters interact. Like, this is the one that's just, again, for me, is super impressive. I'm really just in love with the acting of this film. And again, this is just a franchise that in 2023, having it all kind of lead up to this, I think maybe in 2023 I was a little bit more hesitant on whether this was my favorite, if I was going to push it to the number one spot, or if it does just settle here in two. Now on a rewatch, I think I'm pretty comfortable kind of leaving it here in two, because obviously number one is my favorite. I think it's a lot of people's favorite in the franchise. That one just feels like it is a tier above the rest. So coming in at number one, Mission Impossible Fallout. When an IMF mission ends badly, the world is faced with dire consequences. As Ethan Hunt takes it upon himself to fulfill his original briefing, the CIA begin to question his loyalty and his motives. The IMF team find themselves in a race against time, hunted by assassins while trying to prevent a global catastrophe. The film stars Tom Cruise, Henry Cavill, Rebecca Ferguson, Simon Pegg, and Ving Rhames. Mission Impossible Fallout was directed by Christopher McQuarrie and was released in 2018. So yeah, I am realizing now that I did misspeak a couple entries ago when I was talking about Rogue Nation. That is the film where you get Alec Baldwin is first introduced as he's in the CIA and he's kind of trying to bring down the IMF, and so you get those great scenes between him and Jeremy Renner, and then this is the film where he kind of makes a turn and now he's joined the IMF. And again, this is another, just, he's phenomenal in this. This is another one that kind of is, we're in this era again of once we've learned to love all these characters, because everyone's at this point multiple appearances in, for the most part, at least all of our main characters. And so this is where we kind of get this range, we get to this point where the performances really kind of stand out. And again, Alec Baldwin is great in this because of his kind of, because we just saw him in the last film as not the villain but an antagonizing force. Now all of a sudden he's kind of flipped, but you're still, there's sometimes where you're kind of a little iffy on what he's doing, and you don't know exactly where he stands on things. And then you get your villain of this film, Henry Cavill, who's early in the film, you think he's kind of a good guy, you think he's on the right side, but there's clues along the way where you kind of are getting the idea that you're like, it's not quite really there. But then you're bringing back Sean Harris from the previous films, so you're bringing back another villain, so you're introducing like another kind of element to this. And it's just this film where this is the one, I think, for me, where Mission Impossible, this is the one that really kind of nails and marries the two elements super well of where you get the incredible action, but the story is so good. Again, in a couple of the previous ones, like Ghost Protocol, I had a lot of fun with it, and it does kind of elevate the action, and it elevates kind of the overall just production, I think, of the franchise. But it's not. I mean, the plot is good. It's a good story, but it's not to this level. And then this is what I'm talking about with each film kind of getting better, and it feels like it's taking another step. Really, where it is it's kind of in the plot. That is what feels like it's kind of elevating each of these films. And once you get to Mission Impossible Fallout, the plot I think is my favorite of it. You get multiple people involved. You're bringing in Angela Bassett into the franchise, and you kind of are getting some, again, not conflicting from her part, but kind of her relationship with Henry Cavill. And so you kind of, there's some kind of questions there, some things where we're like, I don't know who we're trusting in every single circumstance. And, the characters themselves, again, they don't know who they're trusting from scene to scene, but sometimes you just have to trust who you're with. This is it, again, like I said, it's the marriage between the story and the action, because there is such great actions, set pieces in this is, you get the parachuting scene where him and Tom Cruise and Henry Cavill are like jumping out of the plane, and Henry Cavill like passes out and Tom Cruise is having to like rescue him in the air. Like that's a phenomenal scene. Later on in the film, obviously you kind of get the big action set piece at the end of the film that is, again, I talk about the marriage that works so well, because it is just the marriage of not just that action set piece, but the emotion of what's happening in the story at that point. And I don't want to, even though this is old enough. This is, again, what did I say, 2017, 2018? This is like 7-8 years old at this point, so I'm maybe a little more comfortable. I will say that I've talked about Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt's wife, in her role that she has in a couple of the films. This is the film where she kind of has, it's the biggest moment, and it really kind of makes you appreciate 3 a whole lot more, because you have to really kind of buy in and love. You don't have to love the third film, but you have to really, again, just kind of be bought into that subplot in order for this to work as well as it does. And this third act is just the best third act in the franchise. That's even tough to say, because there's a couple of these, like Dead Reckoning, that has a great third act, but this is one of those, like, the best third act in my opinion. This is the one that has, you talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman, Henry Cavill. He's the other guy that I was talking about, the next best kind of villain in the franchise, and I probably do like him more than Philip Seymour Hoffman, just because his character overall is just so well rounded. Because he's kind of, you got him kind of backstabbing and kind of playing the fence, where he's trying to play both sides, and because working for the syndicate, but just trying to play the IMF. And so there's just so much going on with the characters, the plot, the action. This is, in my opinion, the film that it all comes together the best, and that's why, for me, and I think for so many people, Mission Impossible Fallout is the best in the franchise. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below in the comments what your rankings are on the franchise. Are we kind of at least in the same ballpark? Because, again, my whole kind of like 3, or maybe even 2 through like 6 could just kind of be dependent on the day. It could kind of just change around a little bit. So I'm just curious to see if we're at least in the same ballpark, or are you one of those people? Because I have seen there's a lot of people that they do like 2 and they do love 3, and so those are a little bit higher up. And I've seen some people, I guess another one that is kind of an important to the discussion is, where does the Final Reckoning, where does that land on your list? I've seen some people have it at the bottom, some people have it up at the top. One of my coworkers, she was saying it's by up and away the best in the franchise, which, that's, if that's your opinion, that's cool. That's just not exactly how I saw it on one watch. So it's a fun franchise. Every film is good in it, so it's just exciting to kind of see where your rankings are on the franchise. So yeah, just let me know all of that down below in the comments. And if you'd like to like this video and then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos on this channel, I would greatly appreciate it. And have a great day. This ranking will self-destruct in 5 seconds.